So I'll try to articulate, and then I guess you can read the screen if you need to. I can bend down. Okay, so I thought it would be important to talk about reproductive justice if we're having a conversation about women's rights. And so I have a few comments, and then at the end, I hope to call us to task as individuals and as organizations and associations. So it's comforting somewhat right now to me to be living in a more progressive leaning state during this moment in history when women's rights and abortion rights are being yanked away throughout the country. But as Governor J.B. Pritzker noted the other day on Twitter, abortion is healthcare as long as I am your governor. Women's rights will be protected in Illinois. So it's a little bit of cold comfort because he's right. If the economic winds shift a certain direction, we could end up with a different billionaire, a more conservative billionaire, and my rights, my daughter's rights, my entire family's rights could be stripped away. And so we could lose our rights in other ways if a conservative majority ends up on the Supreme Court in Illinois, or if, for example, like Senator Lindsey Graham wanted to do, is to propose a federal restriction on abortion. So the average person who gets an abortion is a woman of color who is already a mother and who lives at or below the federal poverty line. And so ideally, we would center those women that are directly and most affected by losing abortion access, but gender alone shouldn't be the reason whether someone is included in the struggle for greater rights. And so this is along the theme of the other half of the sky. So the term reproductive justice was created by women of color in 1994 to center the experience of the most vulnerable people in that conversation. And so similarly, that a person is capable of being pregnant doesn't grant them a larger voice, a bigger influence on whether I may or may not get an abortion. So just like trans people, just like trans people exist, it's not up for debate. Abortion rights are not up for debate. Abortion is healthcare, and that's not up for debate. So lack of reproductive rights is everybody's issue, even though only some of us might need an abortion. One article on the ACLU website states it this way: the more expansive and more accurate answer to the question, who needs to get an abortion, is anyone who can become pregnant needs to be able to get an abortion if they need or want one, including many cisgender women, some non-binary people, some intersex people, some two-spirit people, and some trans men. One additional group of non-women people that, or I mean, I guess they didn't include women, but people that list might have included is children, kids, and so kids and teens need abortions too. But just as cisgendered heterosexual couples sometimes say, we got pregnant or we're pregnant, sometimes they might also say, for a variety of reasons, we need to get an abortion. Ultimately, while the person whose body is undergoing the pregnancy should be able to make a final decision about whether to continue a pregnancy, the consequences for a couple are shared. So men's rights and any rights of a partner to any person needing an abortion is completely interwoven into the rights of the person needing the abortion. Thus, abortion, a necessary component of healthcare, is a human right and not only a women's right. The quashing of bodily autonomy rights, rights for trans people, and rights of people who need an abortion are born of the same cloth, the same hatred, the same bigotry, the same system of oppression is churning out legislation to limit human rights. The same people in power are leveraging a divide and conquer strategy to maintain their position of power. And some people are taking the bait. The divide and conquer strategy is why, including and maybe especially after the right to an abortion access was severely limited, many women thought it was a good idea to be vocally, openly, publicly disdainful and exclusionary of trans people, and in particular trans men. These women were told they are better than, above, more human, more valid by a certain swath of politically powerful people. The people in power are driven to uphold what bell hooks might call the imperialist, white supremacist, hetero-patriarchy. One political theorist, Lorna Bracewell, says a small but vocal wing of the contemporary feminist movement has aligned itself with some of the most reactionary and anti-feminist forces in domestic and global politics to oppose trans rights. The divide and conquer strategy, maybe a lot of us are familiar with in our history in America, is the same reason poor white people in America were told and believed with all their might that they were better than Black people. They may be exploited economically, but they held a special ticket into high ranks, the color of their skin. Thus, they were less resistant to their own oppression. Currently, the cisgendered women, whether or not they have the capacity to have a baby, are being sold a lie, that someone is encroaching on their shared sense of identity, and they feel very threatened by it. So, a little bit of an abrupt ending, but I'll close with some call to tasks, which is on the UUA website. It's a very long list. You can read it yourself. I'll just stick to one per category. So individually, what can we do? So we can work to ensure equity and respect and eliminate discrimination and coercion for all participants in the adoption and foster care system. 2, in our relationships, we can seek and accept leadership from people most affected by reproductive injustice. 3, in congregation, we can form a reproductive justice group, task force, committee, or interfaith coalition. And then as the UUA Association could provide curricula, resources, current information, and networking opportunities that congregations can use in their reproductive justice education and advocacy efforts. So most of these recommendations include speaking up. So I would encourage people to not stay silent on the issue in any way that you can fit your way in. So thank you.
I belong to this church for about 8 years, since we moved down here when our oldest daughter, Annika, was born. And we are also parents to Rainbow, who turned 5 in May. Our daughter Rainbow socially transitioned in January, which means that she began to use she, her pronouns and to introduce herself as a girl. I want to thank first everyone in this community who has interacted with us, and I'm going to try not to cry too much when I'm talking, but I'm pretty emotional about this. Because you all have given our child a gift that no one can ever take away, which is like being accepted in the first community that she was in as the person that she is. Trans kids know who they are. I have a picture I'm going to pass around from our Christmas card, which was taken around this time last year outside of the castle. And even before she told me earlier this year that she felt like she was really a girl, she already had some dresses that she had picked up, that I had picked up at her request. And when we told her that we were taking the family Christmas card, she definitely wanted to wear one of those dresses. I'm going to pass that around because it's very cute. She wore the dress when we went to the pumpkin patch with Grandma. And one day, after she had asked us to start calling her Rainbow in the house, we were on the way to school to pick up Ani, and I asked her, would you want people to know you as Rainbow at school? Thinking that she was going to be starting a new school in a few months, and that might be a good time for her to try that out. And her face lit up and she said, yeah, I want everyone to know me as Rainbow everywhere. And then she went into school at All Day Montessori the next day and told everybody. And I found out afterwards. So I was sort of playing catch up, sending emails to her teachers and trying to see how they were taking that news. Kids have been better about it than I expected them to be. But in case you've been watching Fox News because your remote is broken or something, things are still, it's still not easy for a kid like Rainbow. There's not a gift basket that gets mailed to you. There are kids that teased her or told her that she was really a boy. There are places in this country where my family could be investigated and our child taken away from us for sharing the ways that we are supporting her. This was really immediate for me because when we were kind of just trying to figure out how to best support her, because of COVID, there's a lot of support groups that you can join online. And so I would talk to parents from all over the country. And kind of like what you were saying, Anna, about Illinois, I felt very lucky to be in a place where we have some legal protections, but hearing about parents who were having custody issues with someone who was not respecting their child's identity or living in a place where they felt like that could be used against them by the welfare system, the child welfare system, it's very scary. We still haven't seen one of her cousins in Milwaukee since this happened, and I think it's around being uncomfortable about that. So in feminist theory, they talk a lot about the double bind, and I love how Anna pointed out like all of the connections between the ways that people are affected by these systems. And the double bind is just a way of saying that you can't win, right? So if you're a woman in meetings and you're too quiet, then everybody just thinks you're passive and weak. And if you start talking, then everybody thinks you're really aggressive. So there's just no way to get around it, right? And I think the way this works for trans kids is that, when a kid states their identity as young as a kid like Rainbow, it's like, well, how could they possibly know? It's probably just a phase. And in response to that, I think there's no better way to show our child that we will affirm whatever her identity ends up being than to affirm who she is right now. But then if they wait until puberty, there's the sense that it's very sudden. And if it happens as an adult, then it's, well, you were fine living as a boy or girl until now. So there's never a right time in terms of other people's comfort, it seems like. Despite these challenges, Rainbow has never wavered in who she is. The vast majority of youth who transition early are happy with their choices, and supporting them in their identity is the most important thing that families and communities can do to protect them from transphobia that causes higher rates of self-harm among trans and gender nonconforming kids. Stigmatizing trans and gender nonconforming kids is not something that ends with those trans kids. It is the same system that gets a gentle boy in trouble for playing with dolls. It is the same system that treats women who are not desirable as disposable. When someone decides it is their job to decide who a real woman is and isn't, things get ugly fast. In spite of my experiences with Rainbow, I think the most frightening encounter I've ever had with transphobia was about 20 years ago when I was in college. With my best friend, Kate, who is a petite, pale lesbian with the haircut of a middle school boy, but still very much a woman. And we were out at a bar and someone saw her go into the bathroom, and this drunk guy decided that it was a man in the woman's bathroom and started knocking on the door and yelling, and there was nothing we could, eventually we were able to get out of there, but it was very scary. And I think it's very clear that when we start policing who is a real woman or not, it gets scary for everyone who is a little bit different pretty fast. A lot of the policies that were created even to stigmatize trans athletes, I think it's important to understand the connection with racism, because a lot of those were created to question the credentials of Black cis women. Caster Semenya, who's the track and field gold medalist, has repeatedly had her biology questioned and is now restricted from competing based on her body's natural level of testosterone, in spite of being a cis woman, unless she has medical interventions to change the balance of her hormones. And Ryan was reminding me actually that I think one of the ugliest things in mainstream media around this was the treatment of Michelle Obama, where there's all kinds of ugly statements like that about her. Just like with abortion and other reproductive healthcare, radical extremists are trying to force gender-affirming care into a silo to make you think that it is something that those people over there need that does not affect you. They believe that you will be happier if my kid has to go to a separate building for their weird specialty care. They believe that they will be able to shut down those weird specialty clinics more easily. And they are not wrong. Lurie Children's Hospital has canceled at least 1 month of their support groups this summer based on threats from radical right-wing groups. I also think that there's a lot of the same techniques rhetorically used, like the rhetoric around late-term abortion that makes it seem like women are doing that for fun. I think that all these women who are getting like recreational third trimester abortions live with the kids who are getting hormone therapy from a doctor that they've only met once, and they all have unicorns because they don't exist, right? They're just made up, and that's the point. Trans kids are not asking for much beyond basic human courtesy and respect. When I met with Rainbow's teachers earlier this year to talk about it, it was a pretty normal kindergarten discussion. All they're being asked to do is follow the words of Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Maybe you didn't think you knew any transgender people until today. First, you probably did. Second, now you know at least one. I'm here if you have questions. I thank you all for your kindness to my family, and especially Rainbow, and I ask you to join us in making this world safer for all of our children.
Thank you, Maria. That was so moving. I love you and your family. This morning, at this moment, we are entering the 4th week of one of the largest global feminist rebellions in history, led primarily by Gen Z, young women, and girls in Iran. In mid to late September, before the New York Times or Washington Post or NPR or The Guardian began covering this story, I saw a TikTok trend begin to unfold as I scrolled through videos, content copied and shared and reshared to keep the videos from being removed. Grainy videos of flames, signs, tears, pleas for the West to pay attention before their internet blinked out, before the voices were blocked. Young Iranian women asking for a signal boost for a burgeoning protest, fueled by decades of oppression, sparked by the death of a 22-year-old young woman. Kurdish woman Jina Amini, known globally as Mahsa Amini, was traveling with her family to visit her brother in the capital city of Tehran when she was detained by the morality police, whose role is to ensure adherence to the Islamic Republic's strict dress code. In the United States, unfortunately, we need not strain our imagination to understand that theocratic regimes intentionally misinterpret sacred texts as a mandate for oppression, exercise that oppression with brutality, and first and foremost against women and queer people of all genders. 3 days after being detained, the police pronounced Mahsa Amini dead by cardiac arrest. She had actually been brutalized to death, so this lie was a further insult. And while the brave, everyday people of Iran are no strangers to protest and rebellion, this time, this outcry, led primarily by young women, has been one of the largest, longest, and loudest in the 43 years since the Iranian Revolution. It has crossed urban and rural lines, class and generational divides, men, women, and even schoolgirls shouting down administrators in the streets, standing on cars, cutting off their hair, which is a huge symbol of protest, burning hijabs, and tearfully sharing their rage on social media sites, and even yesterday afternoon, heroically hacking into live state television broadcasts and showing flames and the pictures of the women, not just Mahsa Amini, but other young women who've been killed during these protests. Despite the government's astonishingly brutal response that includes killing hundreds of protesters and silencing social media and even turning off the internet, costing its own economy millions, the protests continue. in part due to a global network of censorship subverters who are lending nearly untraceable proxy access. I don't really understand, but mostly because the protesters themselves are drawing from a deep well of fury and frustration and sheer bravery. I find their protest inspiring, and I am furious that women, girls, and non-binary people globally must fight so often to the death for simple bodily autonomy. The Kurdish slogan, Jin Jihad Azadi, women, life, freedom, has been the rallying cry for these protests. It's a resonant demand that defines sharply the protests' leaders, women, the stakes, our lives, and the objectives, freedom. Women, life, freedom. Just imagine the lives they would live in freedom, the art they would make, the problems they would solve, the rest they would take, the joy they would express, the care they would give, the love they would receive, the world we would all share. The following exchange is from a conversation between journalists Hala Mahideen and Dorsa Jabari on the Al Jazeera program, The Take. The morality police are always around. We don't know where they're going to be. Every time we leave the house, it's always in the back of our minds. Should I wear this headscarf? Should I pick something more conservative? And it's just exhausting, and it's draining, and it's an extra level of stress that is added to women's lives. Many of the women I've spoken to after Mahsa's death, they were in tears, they were just crying. And I was asking them, why are you crying? And they said, we are just so angry. We don't know how else to express our feelings. And the issue isn't just about the hijab. It's about the fact that women want to be able to make that choice when they leave the house and not to live in this constant state of fear. Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wrote, I am angry. We should all be angry. Anger has a long history of bringing about positive change. In addition to anger, I am also hopeful because I believe deeply in the ability of human beings to remake themselves for the better. Women, life, freedom. Thank you.